Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Good morning. For those of you who have been paying attention a little bit, you might notice that the title of this talk slightly changed. And that has something to do with me getting out of my comfort zone today. You see, if anyone would have told me 5 years ago that I would be on this stage or on any stage that I've been in the past years at a tech conference, I probably would have laughed at you very hard. And it's not that weird because there is actual research on common fears of people, and second on that list is death. And first on that list, and I'm not kidding you, is public speaking. So most people would rather die than go through this excruciating torture that I'm going through at this point. So I figured that the only way that I'm probably going to survive this and having fun while actually doing so is to talk about something that I truly, truly love. And when I referred to that comfort zone a bit earlier, that had something to do with, in previous talks and previous sessions, I always included a technical part and technical slides in my talks, because, well, I'm speaking at a tech conference, so I probably should include a couple of tech slides and the technical part of things. But if I'm truly honest with myself, then what really drives me is how we are wired, how we are making decisions, how social dynamics are affecting our work, and how heuristics are affecting our work. And luckily for me, I do not consider domain-driven design a purely technical thing, because, well, it's a way of dealing with complexity, it's a way of reasoning, a way of how we think, and that has everything to do with what I truly love. So I figured that this conference would probably be a good first conference to go on a fully social mode. I do want to start out with a disclaimer, though, because, well, I lost one security blanket, so I'm including another. I am not a kick-ass developer. You guys are all way better developers than I am, probably. I do not speak technology fluently, and I am a social scientist. My background is in social sciences. Even though I've been working in this IT environment for, well, quite some years now, but I am a social scientist. But that doesn't mean that anything that is on this slide deck isn't true. There was a fourth point, actually, on here, and I wanted to include the fact that maybe you won't learn anything new on a technical level today. But when I was discussing this talk and these slides with one of my trusted advisors, he kind of got upset when he read that. And he was like, why is that in there? Why did you include that? Because what you're doing, what you're researching, what you're studying has everything to do with tackling this complexity in software development. And it has everything to do with what we're working on. So don't you dare say that people won't learn anything new on a technical level just because you do not consider yourself to be a kick-ass developer. And that made, yeah, well, it was quite impressive because he was standing up and I was sitting down, so it was kind of intimidating. But it made me think, and I believe that he's right. Because if I'm honest, then indeed everything I do and how we are wired, how we're making decisions, has everything to do with how we can build even better products. So my goal here today is basically to make you think, to challenge you on how we are wired, how we make decisions, and how we collaborate as teams. And for me, when I saw this visual at one point, that kind of hit me. And indeed, if this is the situation, then how are we going to keep this thing sustainable? How are we going to prevent ourselves from going crazy altogether in a few years? When I was starting to think about that, and when I was walking around at clients and talking about colleagues about this, I very often hear things like, well, IT isn't living up to its promises, or the business is throwing all these insane requests at us, but they don't really know what they want. So what I very often hear is that the problem that we're facing is that we are spending way too much money on IT and that it's still not working properly. And that what we want is we want faster delivery and shorter time to market and cost reduction and excellent CI/CD pipelines. And what we need for that, well, obviously we need more developers, right? And we also need microservices and DevOps and serverless architectures and anything else that we've heard at the latest conference that we attended. So maybe after today we will need something new or something more. But as I said, I'm a social scientist, so when I started to think about this, and I saw this quote, that really hit me. Because software development is a technical activity, but it's conducted by human beings. We write the code. We are not writing code for computers, we are writing code for other human beings. So that's what we should focus on. So I honestly think that a lot of the technical issues that we are solving are a consequence of organizational issues or communication issues. And that almost every technical issue is a consequence of this, and that we are mistaking these organizational issues for technical issues. And as a consequence, we are very often busy treating the symptoms instead of the actual root cause of our problem. So when I try to translate that into the logic of the previous slide, I think that the truth might be more close to something like this. That we don't listen to understand, but we listen to reply. We've heard that in the keynote session this morning as well. And that what we actually want, is we want the right people talking about and working on the right things at the right time. And what we actually need for that, and of course there's a lot of stuff that we need, but I can only cover so much in 1 hour. So today I will focus on a shared sense of reality, understanding of how we're making sense of the world, and understanding of some social heuristics that are working for us and against us all day. Because in the end, it's not about, well, craft. Of course it's about code, but it's really about people. And I am sorry that I missed Andrea Goulet's talk yesterday, but at one point I heard her say that communication is the artifact of your ideas. And if communication is the artifact of your ideas, then that's not that different from coding. So it's also a skill. It's a skill that we can learn. If we can learn how to code, if we can get better at it, then we can also get better at this social side, this communication side of things. But instead, what we very often do is we come up with all sorts of crazy solutions. And one of them is, at my last job, we called this the vicious cycle of unsustainable software development. And I see this very often at companies. There is this fear of touching existing code, and then we start to come up with all sorts of workarounds, and that makes the system grow in size and complexity, and what we then do is we throw more developers at the problem. That's not a solution, right? I mean, this is, like it said, it's unsustainable. So I think that one of the root causes of this problem, and what we actually should be doing, is we should focus more on the organizational side of things, the social side of things, understand how they are affecting our work and our problems. So maybe what we should try to do is this. We should maybe first solve the problem and then start writing the code. Very often I'm at a company and they have a problem, and immediately we start thinking in terms of solutions and technologies, and we should start doing this and start writing this. But maybe we should think about it first, before we actually start acting. So, like I said, what we actually need, as far as I'm concerned, is a shared sense of reality, understanding how we are making sense of the world, and understanding of a couple of social heuristics. And I'm going to talk about 3 heuristics today that are working for us and against us all the time, continuously. And they will be very interesting to see how we can overcome them at certain points and where we can celebrate them in our work. I wanted to start out with value congruence, and that's just a fancy term that social scientists like to use. And it basically means that you're having this shared sense of reality, that you're living in the shared sense of reality, that you are on the same page with the rest of your team or the rest of your organization, but at least with your team, and that you have the same values. Because the thing is, we all have values, personal values and business values, but we base our behavior on these values. So if they are not aligned, if we are not aligned with the rest of our teams in terms of values, then the decisions that we will make, well, won't probably be the best decisions possible. And when I talk about values, that can be a lot of things. It can be shared goals, shared definitions of done, shared standards, shared techniques. But the thing is that we should reflect on them regularly. Very often, when teams even do this, they do that at the beginning of a project or something that they're working on. Yes, these are the values, these are our goals. And then we start doing stuff, and after 2 weeks, no one actually really knows what they were doing anymore and why they're doing it. And then you get these antipatterns of value congruence, which means that we are either being stuck in meetings all day, not getting some actual work done, or we are running around like headless chickens. And I'm not really sure if that's an expression in English, by the way, but it is in Dutch. And I'm Dutch and we're in Amsterdam, so that's fine. But earlier we are all heading in different directions, and we are not really know what we're doing anymore. So this is both not what we want. And one way to overcome this and to create this shared sense of value, this shared sense of reality, might be to have more autonomous teams that then can create their own shared sense of reality. But creating autonomous teams is not something that we can do overnight, right? That's difficult. So this is what we probably want, autonomous teams and a shared sense of reality. But where do we start then? I'm not going to tell you today how you are going to do this. I'm just going to explore a couple of scenarios and options that we could consider to increase the shared sense of reality. And I think that maybe we should start with dependencies, because if I'm depending on you, then I'm not autonomous, right? So maybe we should start with minimizing dependencies. But that means that we will have to put in some real effort to understand the entire domain that we're working on. That we really have to understand the problem and the things that we are working on, that we are trying to solve. So in order to be autonomous, we need to be independent. And in order to be independent, we need to have a lot of in-depth knowledge on the domain that we're working on. And there are all sorts of techniques that you can use for that. Event storming is one of them. There is an expert in the room right here, so maybe we can pick his brain after this session. But there is no silver bullet, and there's also no silver bullet for creating autonomous teams or increasing the shared sense of reality. So my goal today is to explore a couple of situations that I've seen, and where I think, hey, maybe we can learn something from this situation, and we can see how it reflects on our own situation. So one of the first things that we have to consider are domains. Are we going to organize our teams around business domains or technical domains? What will be our focus? And both have advantages, but maybe when we are talking about increasing the shared sense of reality, I believe that it's easier to do when you are organized around business domains. And simply because there will be a better fit with the rest of the organization and its needs and its goals. There also will be a smoother conversation between business and IT, because you are talking about business problems. You're not talking about solutions and technology right away. You're talking about the business problems that you want to solve. So it will be easier to create this shared language. You will be talking more of the same language between business and IT, and maybe you will start understanding each other. And that will be a very good thing, I believe. So what kind of people would we need? And, well, of course, a lot of perspectives on that as well. But I really like this T-shaped profile perspective, which says that you can have in-depth knowledge on business domains and broader knowledge on technologies, or in-depth knowledge on technologies and more broader knowledge on business domains. And I think this is very interesting. And when I started seeing this in a lot of situations, I also noticed that very often we as developers, or you as developers, or developers in general, are very often presenting themselves or marketing themselves as tech specialists. Hey, I'm a back-end engineer or a Java expert, front-end developer, or I am a tech generalist, I'm a full-stack developer. But almost never is anyone presenting themselves or marketing themselves as a domain expert. And why is that? I mean, we need domain experts, right? But very often all our vacancies that we see are looking for tech specialists. So that was something that I started to think about, and well, maybe we should do something about that. Maybe we should be proud of being a domain expert in some cases. So this has also a lot to do with how we make decisions. Because very often we are not really aware, and we are not really aware of why we are making certain decisions, why we are doing certain things. And when you have in-depth knowledge on the business domain, that will mean that you will have more knowledge and more understanding of the problem that you're facing. So you'll be able to better formulate that problem and define it, and then start thinking about solutions, instead of jumping to conclusions right away. So you will be able to make less biased decisions. And that's one of the advantages that this can bring you. And before you're heading into an existential crisis, I'm not saying that everyone in one team should be T-shaped like the thing that we just saw on the left. I'm talking about teams as a whole being T-shaped like the one on the left, with a lot of in-depth knowledge on the business domains. Because, of course, we need experts in a team. But I'm talking about the whole team. So no worries. When we relate this to how our teams are structured, I wanted to do this with two examples that, well, I very often see at clients. And one of them is this. And there are a lot of dependencies here between teams. And the T-shaped profiles of these teams will look like the one that you're seeing there on the right, with a lot of in-depth knowledge on UI, logic, and data, and more broader knowledge on the business domain. And there's nothing wrong with this, but in this case it will be harder to create a shared sense of reality, because you are focused on your own part of the puzzle, on your own little island, basically. So it will be harder here to create that shared sense of reality. And within these smaller teams it will be, because you will be talking about the same thing, but maybe as a whole, it's harder. So it might be better or different when we are organized like this. And when we are organized like this, and there's one team per domain, that means that we as a team have to have a real understanding of the entire domain that we're working on. We have to know what we're doing and why we're doing it, because we cannot focus on just one little part of the puzzle. So in this case, it might be easier to be on the same page with the rest of my team because we are talking about the same things, more or less. The second thing that I wanted to discuss today is sense-making. And this is something that we are doing all the time, all day long. Because in an average day, we are getting so much information and impulses being thrown at us. And we have to process them all. And if we would have to do that deliberately and consciously, then we would go crazy and we wouldn't get any work done at all. So luckily, we have strategies for this that help us here. And one of them is heuristics, which we will get to in a bit. But there are two perspectives on sense-making that I particularly love, and I think we can combine them. And they help me in categorizing the world and seeing, well, in which domain or which world am I working, and then I can decide if I can celebrate heuristics or that I should try to actively overcome them. So that's a really helpful tool for me, so I hope it will be for you as well. So the first perspective that I really like is this thinking fast and slow thing from Daniel Kahneman. And he basically says that we have two systems, a system 1 and a system 2. And our system 1 is a system that we are using 95% of our time. And it's impulsive, and it's fast. And it's based on our gut feeling, on our intuition. And for example, if I would ask you, hey, how did you get here this morning? Could you tell me every single decision that you made to get here? That's a very hard question, because there are so many decisions that you had to make to come here. And that's where System 1 comes in, because it helps you to make decisions very quickly based on everything that's already in your head. You know how to do things. So System 1 is a very great system to have. And because 95% of it is being done quite automatically, you have 5% left to spend with your System 2. And System 2 is a rational, more slower, deliberate system that will help you in solving the more complicated problems. A very clear example is if I would ask you 2 plus 2, 4. That's an automatic reaction, you don't have to think about it. If I would ask you, hey, 177 plus 233 divided by 4, you need your System 2 to solve that problem. So that's the difference between these two systems. The other perspective that I really like is this Cognition Model, and I'm always doubting how I should pronounce it because there are a lot of perspectives on that as well, but you know what I mean. And this says that we can divide the world into 4 domains. We have an obvious domain, which consists of problems like, it's that kind of problem. What you do then is you sense, you categorize, and you respond. Because it's an obvious problem that you've been facing quite some time, you know what to do. And then there's a complicated domain. And there's also a clear relationship between cause and effect. It's predictable, but you need to be an expert in order to make a good decision here. So what you do here is you sense, you analyze, and you respond. There's also a complex domain, and we are operating in that domain very, very often. And everything that you do in this complex domain changes the domain. And then the results could only be understood in retrospect. So you could have not known beforehand what the best decision might have been. So you have to experience it. It's also a domain where you can safely fail. So that's the good news. You can fail. You can act in the domain, change it, and then do something with the feedback that you gathered in that domain. And then there's the chaotic domain, and that's where all hell breaks loose. Chaos is the bug that brought your site down on the day of release. And what you have to do then is you act. You don't have the time to think, you don't have time to categorize or analyze, you just act. You make sure that the thing gets under control and you do something with it. So like I said, I think that we can combine these two perspectives. And that leaves me with 2 worlds that I think that we are very often operating in, especially in software development. So I think on the one hand, we have a world with complicated domains, with a lot of known risks, where we could use our System 2, where we should actively think about the decisions that we're making. In this world, calculation will help us, because we can think about stuff, we can list pros and cons, we can weigh alternatives, we can think about scenarios and possible risks, we can identify them. Calculation helps. Use your System 2 in this world. But then there are also situations where they are in complex domains with a lot of uncertainties, and then you need more than calculation. Calculation is fine, but in some cases you just need something more, because calculation alone is not enough. And that's where heuristics come in, because they can really, really help you there. So that's the third thing that I wanted to talk about today, social heuristics. Because we are blessed with these things, and very often when I say heuristics, some people say, these nasty things that you should only use that you should never use when you're about to make a very important decision. And I don't agree with that, because social scientists spend their lives researching heuristics, and there are heuristics that are at play all the time. And in some cases, they are really, really helping us. Instead of for example, getting here this morning, that's based on heuristics. You don't have to think about everything deliberately. So there are 3 that I am going to talk about today. But the first question, of course, is how do we make decisions? And especially, how do we make good decisions? We all want to know that, right? If we know that, then we will be in a much better place. And when you ask someone for advice when you're about to make a big decision, they will probably tell you, you should list pros and cons, and you should think rationally about what you're about to do, and you should identify the risks and all the possible scenarios that you might be facing if you make one decision. And that's great advice, but it's not how we're wired. It's not how we work as human beings. And in some cases, like the world that we just saw on the right, it might really work. But if you're about to make a big decision with a lot of uncertainties, it's not enough. You need more. And when I was about to make my last big decision, which was about changing companies and changing roles, everyone I asked for advice told me, indeed, you should list all the pros and cons and identify all the risks and stuff. And I did that, but that was the easy part. Because I made the decision based on my system 2, and I was still thinking, yeah, it still doesn't feel good. And that feeling, the comfort that you need to make a decision, that's what heuristics can do. And there were a lot of uncertainties related to that decision. And that's where heuristics came in, and they provided me with the comfort that I needed to make this decision and to feel good about it. So especially in this complex domain with a lot of uncertainties, we should celebrate heuristics, and we should be happy that they are there and that we can rely on them in a lot of situations. So the 3 heuristics that I'm going to talk about today are what you see is all there is, or the availability heuristic, beware of the experts, which is highly related to overconfidence, and the curse of first impressions, which is related to the anchoring effect. And the things that you see in yellow here are what the social scientists call them, and I changed them a bit because I think that's more, it's more true, actually, to the situations that we're facing. So I'm starting with the availability heuristic, or what you see is all there is. And I don't want to be a psychologist here, but we are all suffering from past experiences. For example, I very often find myself in conversations about food. I'm not really sure why that is, or maybe I'm denying stuff, but I'm talking about food very often. So not that long ago, I was at a restaurant with a friend, and I told her, hey, I think I will take the stuffed mushrooms as an appetizer. And she made this face, and she said, I had mushrooms once in a restaurant, I got really sick, so I'm never eating them again. Okay. That quick reaction, that automatic reply to what I was saying about mushrooms, that's the availability heuristic at work. This heuristic is all about estimating the likelihood of future events based on past experiences and memories. So if these memories can come to mind, and if they come to mind pretty quickly and pretty easily, because the only thing I had to do was saying mushrooms, and she was all getting all these associations with it, she thought that, hey, if I have mushrooms again, it will be the same as the past experience that I had. So the easier these memories come to mind, the more likely we are to estimate that the future events will be the same as the one in our memories. And what happens here is that the mind thinks, if I can think about it, it must be important. But statistically, this might not be your best effort. And the same happens in our work. Maybe if we need to buy or build a new application, then immediately we'll start to think, please let us don't do this, or please let us don't use that. Or maybe you think, hey, in a previous job, I had the similar situation, and we did this, and it really worked perfectly, so let's do that here again. It doesn't mean that that has to be the best solution for this scenario that you're facing right now. So first I wanted to take a look at this heuristic in this complicated domain with a lot of known risks. And when we stick to that example, when we are buying or building a new application, then that's a scenario for system 2. I mean, we can think about it. We can identify risks. There are uncertainties, yeah, sure, but it's a complicated domain, so we can use our system 2. But what very often happens is that we rely on our system 1, and we start making associations and making decisions quite quickly without thinking about them. And when I started thinking about that and compare it to a situation that was not software related, then I thought, hey, something else happens there, and that's weird. Because, for example, if I am going to buy a new bike, If I want to get a new bike to get me from home to work, or I want to get a bike that gets me up in the mountains in Italy because I'm going on holiday there, or maybe I have some new ambitions and I want to be the best cyclist in the world and win the Tour de France or the Giro d'Italia. Then I have 3 problems or 3 domains which require 3 different solutions. So what I do then, I go to a shop or I do some online research about all the possible options and the alternatives that I might have. I go to a shop and I ask the salesperson, this is my problem, I want to get a bike that gets me from home to work, what would you recommend, what would you do? So you actively start looking for advice, you actively start addressing your system too. Because, well, you're about to spend quite some money, right? So it better be worthwhile. So why doesn't that happen in software teams that I very often see? That's a weird thing, I think. So let's say we are facing legacy modernization challenges as a team. And we have to decide, are we going to replace or to rebuild? And this is complicated, but we can think. We can use our system 2 here. But like I said, very often system 1 is taking over. And if we compare that to buying the bike scenario, then that's kind of weird. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that in this software development scenario, we are not overseeing the whole thing. We are not overseeing the bigger picture. When I'm buying a bike, I know from beginning to end my domain, my problem, and I know everything that's happening there. I know what the impact of my decisions will be at the end. And very often, and especially if we are organized in these layers, in a software development team, then we only see a small part of it. We don't know what the impact of our decisions will be. And we don't know how costly the decisions are that we're making. So that's why I think it's really important to always convey the bigger picture so that you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. But then again, there are also situations in which we can really celebrate heuristics, the complex domains with a lot of uncertainties. And when I was preparing for this, Nick gave me the idea to talk about a few uncertainties on 2 levels. On an organizational level, because there are organizational uncertainties, but there are also uncertainties when it comes to building a new product. So for all the 3 heuristics, I will be mixing them up a bit and see where we can actually benefit from these heuristics. So uncertainties when it comes to building products for the availability heuristic. Maybe we are facing desirability and usability challenges and uncertainties. Will the customers find value in the idea, and will the solution we build be something our customers want to use? Uncertainties. We cannot get into the heads of our customers literally. But what the availability heuristic does here for you, it retrieves all the information that's available in your head about what you're doing. And if you're thinking about a new product, and if you can think of it, it must be important. In this case, yes, probably it is. Because you've gathered the feedback from your customers. You've gathered all that data. You've gathered everything that you could possibly know about the situation. So in that case, the availability heuristic will retrieve all of that. It will go through it. And if you would have to do that deliberately, trust me, there won't be time to building any new products. But it does that for you. So in this case, if you can think of it and no one other in the team says, this is the stupidest idea that you've ever had, then you can trust your gut here. You can trust your heuristics. And when I was preparing this, I saw this tweet. And it says that the best product ideas come from talking to customers frequently and the teams who build the products. And I do not think that this is a coincidence. Best product ideas do not come from external people or consultants or whatever. They come from the people who are gathering that feedback, who store that feedback somewhere in their heads and use the availability heuristic to retrieve it when they think about new products. I don't think this is a coincidence. It kind of made me feel good about myself that it was true what I put in the slides. The second heuristic that I wanted to talk about is overconfidence, or beware of the expert. And this is always a tricky one because we all love experts, right? And including myself, I love experts and we need them. But there is a fine line between being a real expert and relying on expert intuition, which has everything to do with your system 1 and your heuristics, but we'll get to that in a bit. If I would ask you, do you consider yourself to be a better driver than the average person? And you don't have to answer it, but there was actually research on this. And it was American research, so maybe the numbers would be a bit lower here. But 93% of all American drivers considered themselves to be a better driver than the average person. Statistically, that's not really possible. The same happened when they were asked about intelligence. So that might explain a few things, but it's not possible. It's just statistically not possible. But that has everything to do with overconfidence. This heuristic has everything to do with what the mind believes it knows. We are way more likely to ask ourselves, hey, how do I feel about this? Instead of, what do I think about this? And there's a funny thing with confidence, I think. Because on the one hand, we know that overconfidence can really hurt us. We know it can harm our situations and it can harm our work. But on the other hand, when I scroll through my LinkedIn feed or when I walk into a bookshop, I see all this content about start living the awesome life that you deserve and be more proud of yourself and stand up for yourself. So we are kind of being encouraged to be more confident. And every girl or woman that I know is reading about why nice girls don't get the corner office. And I haven't read it, but I think that the gist is that we should stand up for ourselves more and be more confident, maybe even overconfident. So there's this thing, and I was like, is there a middle ground then? Is there a compromise that we can get to, that we should operate in? And I think there is, but it requires us to really reflect on ourselves critically. And it also requires ourselves, we should consider the possibility that we might be wrong. And that's a difficult thing, because we all hate to be wrong. And like I said, there's this fine line between being a true expert and relying on expert intuition. A true expert, well, we all love them because they have real expertise. But relying on your expert intuition, that's a whole different thing. And I think that we should talk about it right now, probably. If you are an expert, then you have a lot of information in your head stored about a certain topic. And for experts, cues are really, really fantastic. If they're in a certain situation, and that situation is providing them with cues, then the cues will provide them access to all the information that's in their head about that certain topic. And because you're an expert, because you know very much about a certain topic, you can come up with a lot of arguments to support your decisions. But you don't have to be an expert, a real expert, to have a lot of knowledge about a certain topic. So maybe when I'm thinking that I'm relying on my system too, because look at all the arguments that I can come up with, I am still relying on my system one. Because I am looking for supportive arguments in my head. And if I have a lot of information available about a certain topic, I can find reasons and arguments to support my decision all the time. The difference is, between relying on expert intuition and being a real expert will also be able to look for counter-arguments for his decision and then still feel good about the decision based on all the real knowledge that he has. That's the difference between relying on expert intuition and being a true expert. So sticking with this replacing or rebuilding scenario, maybe we are facing feasibility. Let's say the years go by, and the platform that our and the technology product that was built on it remains the same. Then it might be that in a few years we won't be able to support this. We won't be able to, maintain this anymore because the people who know how to do it will leave the company. That's a serious issue that we might be facing. And this is a situation for your system too, because very often when this is a challenge, your system one will try to tell you, look at this great team that you're having right here, this great company. Of course you will be able to keep maintaining it, and maybe you'll find other people, or you will find another way to do it. But it will try to comfort you. That's what your system one, it does that. It tries to comfort you. But maybe your system two starts whining. And it will start asking these questions like, yeah, but are you really sure? And maybe we should invest in something else. Maybe we should do something else here. And if it doesn't start whining automatically, you should actively address your system two in this situation. Because you're operating in a complicated domain with known risks. It's not something that happens overnight. You don't have to make a decision very quickly. So you can use your system two. Another very interesting thing is planning. Humans suck at planning. We all suck at planning. We are very bad at it. And projects never go as planned. And the planning fallacy is a perfect example of overconfidence, because we are very likely to underestimate the length of time it will take to complete a task. We are very likely to underestimate complexity, and that has everything to do with overconfidence. For example, if I'm working on something and a colleague comes up to me and he's asking me, hey, I need this and this, when can it be done? And I say 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Okay. Where did that come from? Instead of asking additional questions, trying to figure out his actual problem, looking at my calendar might be a wise thing to do, and actually trying to solve the problem, I just say 2 weeks. And that has something to do with me relying on everything that's in my head and my system 1, telling me, hey, you had a similar situation a while ago, it took you about 2 weeks, you can do it in 2 weeks. Plus, this person is coming to you thinking you are an expert on this. So you're flattered and you say, okay, 2 weeks. If I now start asking all these additional questions, he might not consider me an expert anymore. So that's what your overconfidence does there. But this is dangerous, of course, because maybe 1.5 weeks later you think, this is not going to work. 2 weeks was a pretty optimistic estimation. And that has something to do with how we are asking questions. If we want to overcome this planning fallacy, what we should do is we should consider how we are asking questions. We should more focus on effort instead of time periods. You will get a more realistic estimation out of someone if you ask him, hey, what effort is required to complete this task? Instead of asking someone, hey, I need this, when can it be done? Or how many work can be done in X working hours? You will get a better and a more realistic estimation if you focus on tasks and effort in your questions. So the last thing, and there they are, sorry, I have this one, the experts. We have to be aware of them. And like I said, experts are everywhere and they like cues and they start retrieving all this information in their heads. And if they think that they are relying on their system 2, because they can come up with a lot of arguments, they are still relying on their system 1. So we have to sense when we are in a situation where we are leaning towards expert intuition or where we are a real expert on something. In case you are relying on expert intuition, you could also hire dart-throwing monkeys, which will be much cheaper and it will help you achieve the cost reduction that we so badly want. So it's a trade-off. You have to think about what works for you. But if you wanted to make a good decision or a better decision and you're an expert, then what you should probably be doing is sense that you are maybe leaning towards overconfidence and force yourself to be uncomfortable. Force yourself to think and force yourself to come up with counter-arguments for your decision. And if you can't come up with counter-arguments, then yes, you are probably either relying on expert intuition or you just made the best decision of your life, either one of those. But if you can't come up with counter-arguments and you're still supporting the decision that you made, then you can trust that probably it's a good decision that you've made there. But on the other hand, overconfidence can also help us. It can help us in complex domains with a lot of uncertainty. For example, when we are building a new product and we are facing these desirability issues, will our customers find value in this idea? Like we just saw, if we can think about it as a team, then it probably might be important and we should build it. And what overconfidence does here is it gives you this boost to start building it and to start feeling good about it and to make it happen. And that's what overconfidence can do. Instead of overthinking everything and doubting every decision that you could possibly make, it will give you this confidence that you need to build the product and to get it done in a realistic time period. Instead of, should we be doing this? Should we? Instead of overthinking and doubting everything that you do. Overconfidence can really, really help you there. Because if you don't feel good about the decision that you made, then the product will probably not be as good as well. And there are some organizational uncertainties that you might be facing, which are related to overconfidence. Maybe there was some bad publicity in the media about the company that you're working in. And then what you will do immediately is you will ask yourself, hey, how do I feel about this? Because that's what we do. We ask our system 1 to come up with emotions and tell us how do we feel about a certain situation. And maybe we think, hey, this is not at all how I think about the company. I cannot identify myself with this article. Some stupid person must have written it because it doesn't make sense. And then it might trigger you to become even more loyal to the company and even go that extra mile. That's what overconfidence can do. But on the other hand, if it's true, if it turns out to be true what's in that bad publicity, then you might feel betrayed. And what overconfidence can then do, it can provide you comfort with the decision that you're about to make of probably leaving the company. Well, depending on how bad the publicity is, but it can provide you the comfort that you need there. The last heuristic that I would like to talk about today is anchoring, or the curse of first impressions. We tend to rely too heavily on the first piece of information that we encounter about a certain situation. If there's a new colleague coming in the company, and I don't like him or her right away, chances are that I will not start doing so anytime soon. Even if he or she is the greatest expert in something and I really, really need him or her. And that makes me a horrible human being, right? I mean, the first impression that I have of something, of someone or something, that sets a baseline, and it's very, very hard to adjust. Except that it doesn't make me a horrible person, because this is how we are wired. Relationships are the single most important thing, basically in our entire life. Because we very often think in terms of job titles and functions and organizational charts, but we act in terms of relationships. If I don't like you, I will probably not start doing that anytime soon, and I will probably not go up to you asking you for advice. So that's why it could be a curse, right? Why first impressions could really, really be a curse. So the anchoring effect in complicated domains with known risks. If we are sticking with the replacing or rebuilding scenario, maybe when you started out your company or your architecture, that was based on the market of that time, based on the customer needs of that time, the business needs of that time, and your goals of that time. But now you are years later, and you're asking yourself, hey, should we still be doing this? Is this still the right anchor? And then it's really hard to lift that anchor and maybe drop it somewhere else. That's a really, really hard thing to do, because it requires you to really actively address your system too. Think about, okay, the anchor that we had, we should really change it, and we should be reflecting on it regularly, because it's really hard to let go of a certain anchor that you have. It's possible, but you really have to repeat it very, very often. Anchoring is also an important source of inaccurate estimates, because anchoring has everything to do with biasing. If I'm working on something with a colleague and another colleague comes up to me and says, well, what do you think? How much time will this and this take? Again, this is not how you should ask the question, but this is how questions are asked very often. And maybe I say, well, I think 3 weeks. And the colleague that's sitting next to me would have said 3 days, but because I say 3 weeks, she said, okay, maybe 1.5 weeks. She's compromising, she's moving towards the middle. We are finding some middle ground there, and that's what the anchoring bias could do. I set the anchor by saying 3 weeks, and she's adjusting her own thoughts and her own perspective based on what I was saying. And that's what really very often happens. And I very often see that at companies, they are facing this huge problem that they're having. And then they say, okay, we need to get in a room and we need to brainstorm and we need to generate radical ideas. And we need to generate as much different ideas as possible between groups. So we put every team in a room and we let them brainstorm. And here's an interesting trade-off about autonomous teams, because they are diverse and they will bias each other. They will use each other's anchor and use that for their own judgments. So that's interesting. If I want to get radical ideas, I should not set diverse groups into a room, because they will compromise, they will move to the middle. If I want to get ideas out of a diverse group, out of an autonomous team, I should not let them talk to each other. I should ask them to use post-its or whatever, but come up with their own ideas before they can start biasing each other. And that's something to think about. The anchoring effect could also be really helpful, because the greatest benefit of the anchoring effect is that it helps us move on. It helps us unconsciously think about trade-offs and think about situations and help us make a judgment call. And the more that we do that, the better that we get at it. So it could really help us. So when we are facing viability uncertainties, does this product make sense within our wider business portfolio? Yeah, uncertainties right there, definitely. But the business portfolio that we have at this point, that's our anchor. And it's a proven anchor because we are making money with it. Our company still exists, we are still here. The portfolio that we have at this point, it does make sense. So who better than we, as the team that develops the product and came up with the idea, to decide if it fits into our wider business portfolio? We could use our anchor, and that anchor is based on all the information that's inside our head that we can retrieve, and it's based on the fact that we are still here as a company. That's also quite a good indication. Organizational uncertainties, and this is actually something that I've faced myself as well. Maybe a new CEO comes in, and he or she starts shaking up things. or there are sudden reorganizations. My anchor in this case was the situation when I entered the company. When I started out, the CEO that was there, the vision, the mission, the goals, how things worked around there, that's my anchor. And then a new CEO comes in, and he starts doing all these different things, and there are reorganizations, and he starts making decisions of which I'm not really sure if I can identify with that. And I use my anchor to make that decision. So the actions that I'm seeing of this new CEO help me decide, hey, do I still want to be part of this company? I do not have to think about that from scratch, but I have my anchor, and it's going to make me help a quick and effective decision about my future at that company. So again, it will provide me with the comfort that I need in order to make decisions. The summary of my talk, these are the things that I'm telling myself very often, is that I should reflect on incidents and find the actual root cause. And I have to remind myself that very often they are not technical root causes. Spread domain knowledge, make sure that you understand the entire domain that you're working on. Think about the bike example, make sure that you know why you're doing what you're doing. And complex problems don't always need complex solutions. If you are working in a complex domain, you can rely on heuristics most of the time. And there are a lot of heuristics that are working for you. I've only discussed 3 today, but there are whole books on all social heuristics that could really help you in making decisions. And challenge your reasoning in a world of known risks. So basically what I'm trying to say is, well, maybe you can have a think if you can see these 2 worlds that I discussed in your own life and how they are affecting your work and your decision making. So at the end of the day, what I very often tell myself is that I could trust my gut, but I sometimes need to think twice. To end this kind of philosophical flood, I wanted to end with a quote, which I really, really like, and it will nuance some stuff probably, that the actual problem that we're having is similar to this. And that kind of marks the end of my talk. I think there is still room for questions. Yes, I see there's still room for questions. I also know that lunch is about to be served, so I don't want to keep you from that. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. And otherwise, I will be around here all day, and you can find me in other places as well. So thank you for now.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we have the mic ready to be thrown at curious minds. Oh, Rebecca.
Thanks for the great talk. I have a question about, because I've read Kahneman, and I've argued that you kind of want to sometimes, you say, well, trust your intuition, but sometimes you have to think twice. And that's really hard to do if we're doing that deception. Let's say, I really love the idea of expertise, intuition gives you all the answers so you don't do this sort of stuff. How do you whack yourself on the side of the head? Because expert intuition, I think, is for techie people, is a real problem. So I mean, so how do you? I mean, I think some people say, well, you can't do anything about that. I mean, it's nice that you said this, but do you have any advice for how do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's not just for an issue for techie people, I think. It's an issue in general. But indeed, and it's a very fine line. But I think you should start out small. I mean, expert intuition, of course, it will be there in very many situations. But when you're about to make maybe you should just use some samples. Like, hey, every once a week we are going to take a real look at one decision that we made. Was this expert intuition or was it real expertise? Can we come up with at least 5 counter-arguments? And if we have them, can we still support that decision? Or are we doubting our decision? Were we relying on expert intuition? So it's small steps. And I mean, I'm still relying on expert intuition very often. But I try to force myself to be uncomfortable and to think and to come up with counter-arguments wherever I can. Yeah, and in my teams as well. Yeah.
Any more questions?
One here in the front.
Yep. Oh, nice catch.
Watch it.
Okay, so you said that teams are often lacking people who identify as domain experts.
Yeah.
And they identify as technical experts. Would you say it should be a role that you actively search for? Would you put it in a job?
I would. Personally, I would. Yeah, because like I said, very often when you see vacancies or someone introduces them to me, they're like, hey, I'm a Java expert or I'm a backend engineer. Okay, great. But I think that domain experts, especially when we are trying to solve the bigger problems, that they are really valuable. But that's just a change in mindset that the world actually needs to start making. But I would, if I would see someone coming at me and he had this in his curriculum vitae, he said, well, I'm a domain expert, I would be impressed. And I think that more organizations should be impressed with the fact that you are a domain expert. Yeah.
But how would you then search for a domain expert?
Yeah,
Let's say
that's the second stage. Yeah, that's something that I haven't figured out completely. But it is, it's something that I thought of last week actually. And I was like, yeah, why is that? And how could we change that? So I'm still thinking about how we could change it and how we could present ourselves differently. But if you have any ideas on that, or anyone else in this room, then, but do you agree with it? Do you?
I find it interesting because I would say I agree with it, but how would you say I'm looking for a domain expert for your own company when you don't, you know,
Yeah.
someone new is never going to be the domain expert right off the bat.
And maybe we shouldn't be putting that much emphasis on that in our job descriptions, but maybe in the conversations that we have with people, if they come to our company for a job interview, maybe we should try to focus the conversation more on that as well, that we are not trying to just focus on their specialties, but also, hey, what do you think about domains, and are you an expert in some domain? That might be a first step, I don't know.
That's
I
very
think
interesting.
Alberto has a lot to say about domain experts, don't you?
Which is really quick. So how do you deal with the Dunning-Kruger effect? Like one of the things that is in technical team is just like you don't have only one expert. You have something like 90% of the people that pretend to be an expert, and you take away the alpha male, and suddenly you have another alpha male or woman just pretending to be the top expert. And so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Any tips or?
Basically, everyone is an expert in a team, usually. Everyone is an expert in his own domain. And that could be a problem, but eventually you could all challenge the decision that was made. I mean, eventually you made one certain decision, and maybe it was, you know, triggered by one specific person, but all the other experts could challenge. It's even fun to do that. I mean, if I'm an expert, and we do this quite regularly with my own team, we get in a room and there was one decision, and we just start throwing questions at that expert and trying to make him or her feel uncomfortable. That's a really fun thing to do. I can definitely recommend you to do that. So that's what we do to overcome that. And of course, you will be relying on expert intuition because it's also a helpful tool. But every week we get in a room and we try to make someone feel uncomfortable. Yeah. Myself included, by the way. So yeah, behind you there's a question.
I have a question about decision making in chaotic environment. Like, let's say we have a...
Sorry, in what environment?
In chaos.
Chaotic.
Chaos.
Okay, yeah.
Let's say we have a bug in production right now, and we need to make a decision right now. What do we do? So
You act.
Yeah. No, I mean, but before you act, you still need to
Yeah, but in that case,
decide how you act. So what is your advice?
my advice there is, because you have to act and very quickly, you have to make very quick decisions, rely on your system one and let it make the decisions for you. And if it turns out not to be the best decision ever, then you could always adjust it afterwards. But in that case, if you have to make quick decisions, you don't have time to address your system two. So you really have to do and go with what you think is the right thing to do. And it probably is the right thing to do in that situation.
So as I understand, it's more like intuition, expert. You rely on expert intuition.
Yeah, and then after that you can start making people feel uncomfortable, but yeah. You just have to solve that problem first, you have to get it under control. You don't have to solve it perfectly, but you have to get it under control, and then you can start doing other stuff.
I think Canadian framework gives kind of useful advice on that. Right? Any more questions? I actually have one. Don't you destroy the relationship with the main expert by making them uncomfortable on a regular basis?
Sorry, do I destroy a relationship with?
Ruin the relationship with the main expert If
Yeah.
you constantly make them uncomfortable, they probably will try to avoid communicating.
Yeah,
to
you need trust for that. Yeah, you can. I started doing that quite soon, actually, in my new company. But the first time that I was part of such a meeting, I was like, he's gonna cry in 5 minutes. Why? Why are we doing this to him? But there has to be trust, because eventually you all work towards the same goal, and you want to get better at it. So I haven't destroyed any relationships yet, but maybe I will in the future. I don't know.
That's probably a question that Alberto wants to ask, but doesn't. How would you distinguish domain expert from dungeon keeper? Dungeon master, yeah.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Do you know?
Not yet, no.
All right, any more questions?
And go enjoy lunch, I would
All right,
say.
thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Great talk.
Thanks.